this is Saili Gupte from Mangrove Foundation. I will be your host for today's session. At the beginning, I would like to request all the participants to keep your camera and microphone off, as this session will be live streaming on Facebook. Now, I welcome you all for the webinar on satellite telemetry of marine animals on the occasion of Endangered Species Day. The Mangrove Cell, Government of Maharashtra and Maharashtra Mangrove Foundation works towards the protection and conservation of mangroves and marine ecosystem of Maharashtra. Now I would like to introduce our today's guest speaker, Dr. Nimit Kumar. He is a marine ecologist and has been serving as a scientist at Indian National Center for Ocean Information System since 2011. He is formally associated with the Marine Fisheries Advisory Services program of IMCOIS. His core strengths are ocean observation, telemetry, remote sensing, and GIS. He is an alumni and part of several international forums. He has sailed for multiple research cruises in the North Atlantic Ocean and North Indian Ocean on board Indian and foreign vessels. His science interest includes conservation, sustainable development, outreach, and capacity building. I now would like to request Dr. Nimit Kumar to take over the session.
Thank you, Saili, and I hope my voice is audible to everyone. Can one of the organizer confirm that my sound is audible?
Sir. Yes, sir, you're audible.
All right, all right. Thank you very much. And okay, so let me just fumble a little bit around in order to see my presentation. Okay, because we all are very new to this online platform. Not that new, but yeah, all the platforms are having their own quirks. Okay, so we go to the opening slide. So basically, on this International Day of Endangered Species, I would like to show utility of a novel tool, because satellite telemetry, when we talk about, somehow, hello, yeah, so we usually think about like birds and lions or tiger tracking, but when it comes to marine environment, there is a little, and there is a reason for that. I'll come to that, but to summarize that, there are now more countries with the capability to make their own satellite. I'm not saying launching the satellite, but more countries are having capability, technological capability to launch, make their own satellite, then do this satellite telemetry experiments on their own. So that shows that this is a kind of a relatively new science, but it has a lot of utilities. And without wasting time, let us jump to that. This talk is divided into 3 parts. So first of all, how a particular like satellite telemetry works, and why one has to do it. Why satellite telemetry, not other tools, and what is there, what is done, and what is being done in our Indian context especially. So the basic idea is this: either you have like a marine animal like a turtle, or if you have a bird, basically researchers put a little bit small of a transmitter, which then gives some kind of signal. And in the progress of the presentation, you will come to know that these are not just beep beep signals, but it has like a lot of valuable information that is being sent through the satellite to a particular, for example, somebody is tracking this particular seal or a bird or polar bear. Then via satellite, that data gets into their computer, just like you can download your email or you can open your email. So that is how telemetry works. And telemetry works also for the vessel tracking and all, but we are not talking about that aspect. So this is the conceptual framework. on the like how satellite telemetry works. Okay, so these are the cases of like a turtle or a bird and then transmitter put on them. In case of birds, hardly a matter of few grams, because then they will have to carry the transmitter and then fly as well. So mostly all the platforms, we call these transmitters a platform, just like we call our email ID or email account or that email client. Similarly, these are called platforms from which the transmission happens. And most of the platforms, we can say more than 90% of the platforms are being communicated through the Argos communication system. So that is a French system, and it is put on the different satellites. And via that, wherever the satellite is overhead, the platform transmits to the satellite, and satellite will then dump the data into the particular account. So that is how it works. And here you can see that my cursor, I don't know if it is visible, but in case of India, there is a circle. So that circle is the radio horizon, a green circle around India in the first image. Let me see if there is any pointer. Yes, pointer is there. Okay, arrow is also there. That is good. So arrow is visible to everyone, or I don't think so. Let me go back to spotlight. Is it visible? I hope so. So
Yes, it's
this
visible.
Unmuted.
right, thank you. And I think I have to reduce the size, but I don't know as of now. But let it be. It doesn't matter. So basically, this is the like a radio horizon around India, and Hyderabad is the like center of that. So Hyderabad, we have multiple organizations, including INCOIS and NRSC, that communicates with these satellites. Okay, and another interesting diagram is this pie chart. So you can see that like what kind of platforms. So birds occupy maximum of the transmissions, and then there are like marine animals also there. Fishes are shown separately. Land animals are there. So in case of marine animals, largely it will be about like turtles or seals, sometimes sharks or whale sharks. And you can see that there is a tiny blue part is there. So there is not like it is a huge contributor, but these are the, like some of the experimental tagging that is happening. For example, for the lobsters or any other benthic animals. So that is also there. And I'll come to that shortly, how that can communicate with the satellite being at the bottom of the sea. Now, we go to the third graph, and I wanted to point this. Can you see that, because this was taken from the Argos presentation, and that was given in the end of 2018. So that was the latest one. And so December 2018, this is the situation where all the platforms are pinging. And you can see the different colors. So the like birds are shown in the yellow, and purple are the land and marine animals. So whosoever like purple dots are there on the land, it is land animal. In the marine case, it is marine animals. And you can see that Atlantic and Pacific are heavily dotted. But in case of Indian Ocean, especially Northern Indian Ocean, there is a huge gap. And that can be seen in this like light dark diagram also here. So this light dark diagram, basically it shows that higher the intensity of what it looks like a light, it is about the communication, that messages. So in last year, how many messages were transmitted from which locations? So here also some of the point what actually leads to these messages. So for example, fishes which are actually moving across the equatorial Eastern Pacific, where it is like in non-El Nino year, it is like a huge like a productivity patch is there, and then fishes tend to gather there. So anchovies and other fishes. So that you can see here, and then you can see that bird migration corridors. So summer and winter migration that happens in the South America. This is one example, and bird migration across Sahara, sub-Saharan Africa. So that is also monitored here. And again, there is a blue circle that I have created on the top of this. So you can see that there are not like many sparks or lights are there. That is where like Indian context. So lot of work is being done with this technology all over the world. But in case of Northern Indian Ocean or India, limited work is being done. And you can understand that if any other country in the Northern Indian Ocean can do that, obviously it is India that can actually come up with that kind of resources. Other neighboring countries are basically economies in transition or development in compared to India. Okay, so coming back to the going to the next slide. I'll have to, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. And then what kind of satellites are there which actually relays these messages from the animals or platforms to our computers? So it started in the 90s. You can see that this constellation building, and now in 2015, that basically Saralatika was the first Indian satellite, ISRO satellite, that also had the Argos communication transporter on board it. And next one in the line was supposed to be this OceanSat 3, the delay of which was due to technical reasons. It was delayed to early 2020. And now because of COVID situation, it is further delayed. So OceanSat 3 is already ready, and launch preparations were almost done. So after this lockdown and everything is over, OceanSat 3 will be actually put in orbit, and it will be the next satellite to have this Argos payload. And most probably it will be the first one to have Argos for that payload communication. So this is the upgrade architecture, and then it can have like a handling of the thousands of platforms at the same time. So that is they call this architecture is the Argos 4 framework. And by 2022, there is another plan for this Angels project, because that is also a little bit delayed, where huge satellites are not required, because all these satellites which were launched till now were actually either Earth observation satellites or other satellites, mostly Earth observation satellites. And Argos communication, the transponder was the added that transponder or sensor or communication on that. But CubeSats can actually be very cost effective, and you can actually launch a number of them with the same budget. So that is the next plan, to populate the constellation with the CubeSats, so or nanosats, and that will actually go. And European that space agency and EUMETSAT, they have committed to the Argos till 2036. So you can understand that till next 1.5 decade, this will be like the major communication channel for this kind of platforms. And coming to the some example that is more familiar, we hear about bird migrations and all. So this is how it looks like when you track a bird or an animal. So this is how you can actually see that the progress of the journey. In case of birds, it is very easy, because birds are always going to be either in the air or on the top of a tree or on the top of a hill or somewhere. And communication with satellite, usually it is not hindered with much of the obstacles. So this is the best case scenario that we can say for the as long as it comes to the communication with the satellites. And worst case scenario, that could be underwater. So that is the reason that the fish or marine animal tracking platforms were developed much afterwards, much afterwards than those radio collars or satellite collars, where lions and tigers are being tracked, or leopards are being tracked, or birds are being tracked. So what kind of tags scientists were using for the fishes or other marine animals? So earlier it was more about the conventional plastic tags, and there is no data as such in that. That is wrong notion. But yeah, you can at least know that, okay, where the tag was put on the fish or on an animal, and then where it was recovered. Recovered in the sense that somebody catches the animal or fish, then you come to know that from that location, fishermen can tell that I found the fish. But what happened in between, that you will not come to know. So that is having very lot of limitations in case of plastic tags. But obviously, it is still being used in many cases, and one has to use it in number of thousands, because the whole fish population, when you want to see where it is migrating, each of them you cannot put with the electronic tags. So in addition to the electronic tags, often scientists put the plastic tags, especially when they know that the fishes are more like in the coastal regions, and they are more prone to getting caught. And then you will get the immediate reporting of what is being caught. So a little bit higher upgrade of that is archival tags. Archival tags are no different than plastic tags, but only in one matter, that whatever happens on the way, it has some sensors and battery on it. So it is not just a dumb plastic tag, but it records, for example, temperature. If depth sensor is there, it records depths, and then like that you can at least know. But you will never come to know about the track and all, because it is too tiny to house all those sensors. So archival tags, again, it is a fishery dependent. One has to catch the fish or the, say, turtle or any other animal, and remove the tag from that, and then connect the tag to the computer and download the data. And then you can see some data. You can plot the data then. So that is there. Another little bit upgrade of the archival tags, it is acoustic tags. So where you know that, okay, you have, for example, fish aggregation device, or you have an estuary through which the fishes in some season will migrate upstream. So like in case of salmon or hilsa, then at the mouth of the estuary, you can put the hydrophone array, or you can put the hydrophones on the fish aggregation device, or reef dwelling fishes are there. Then you can put the hydrophone array on the reef. And then you know that these are the fishes are local. So they are not like highly migratory fishes. So whatever tag that you have put on the fish, wherever it is coming into the range of this hydrophone array, it will ping to the particular receiver that I am here. So then that it is attached with say a surface unit like a buoy, and then it will transmit through VHF or like that back to the shore. So that is how it works. But it is possible. It is fishery independent. You don't have to take the fish or animal out of the water in order to know the location or to track them or to download the data. But the only thing is that you need it is non-migratory species only it is applicable, and you need to put a proper network of hydrophone arrays that works like a cellular towers, or and tags work like a mobile phone. So to give the simpler analogy, satellite tags are uh, a full upgrade on all these things. And here you can see two types of satellite tags. One, it is called pop-up satellite archival tag. So these are called PSATs. And another is this is like what you put on the say hard-shelled turtles or like that. So two different types of tags are there. So these are the both satellite tags only. And how it works is that you put these kind of tags on the animal, and in case of animals that come close to the shore, for example, penguins or seals or turtles, penguins and turtles come out of the water as well, like seals. So that time you can actually get your tag back, and even though it is independent, either you can choose to tag to transmit to back to you, or you can just get the tag back for the maintenance and battery replacement and all. In case of pop-up satellite archival tags, it is like just wherever it actually detaches from the fish after mission is over, it comes back like its name says, to the surface. It pops to the surface, and then it starts transmitting the data. So no matter it is in the middle of the Arabian Sea or very far from Andaman Islands, where you cannot reach immediately, but it will transmit the data while floating on the surface, and you can download. You don't have to collect the tag back. Ultimately, it will reach somewhere, but by the time battery would have been over, so you won't be actually getting the tag back, but you still get the data. So this is the idea about what different kind of tags that is being used, and based on that, yeah. So just to give you idea about some idea about like what are the different parts. So like I was telling that on the top there will be always this antenna which will come out of the water and it will communicate with the satellite. Just below the antenna there is a float. So to ensure that antenna is always out of the water and float will be at the surface of the like sea water. And then whole center of gravity, all the weight and everything, it is down below. So to keep the tag stable. So even though like small waves crashing and all, mostly the antenna will be straight enough to communicate with the satellite. It will never tilt that much that it is going underwater and communication is lost. And then the tag body houses all the different sensors, including light sensor. And I will explain about importance of the light sensor in a while. And then these tethering mechanism comes. So at the end of that, there is a tether that actually goes into the body of the fish. And where you put the on the fish, where you put the tag. So there are like some SOP for that. So there are like these fin rays on the first dorsal part after first dorsal fin, and that is found to be optimal attachment location. So this is more like a ear piercing thing, where there are no blood vessels or nerve endings. So it is minimum like a pain and blood for the fish, minimum chance for the infection. And how we do is that here you can see in the photograph, we this is like the practice on the dead fish, but on board also we do the same. So we put like this plastic on board so that any like rough surface, wooden or metal, that should not harm to the fish body. So on the tarpaulin, we keep on putting the seawater, pumping from the sea itself, and the eyes will be covered with wet cloth. That is also salt water, then wetted with the salt water. And we also put this running seawater hose inside the mouth of the fish, and then water will come out of the gill. So it is like a virtual swimming experience for the fish, where seawater is move on the move, and fish is still steady. And then we put the tag on the fish. So after catching the fish, we immediately take it on the boat. We take it not with the like a pulling hook or anything like that. Otherwise, there will be damage in the jaw. You don't want your fish to get damaged and then attract shark or develop infection afterwards. So you want to take care of the fish like your own child. So you take it up out of the water on some cradle made from fishing net, so that there is no pull from any fishing line, and then carefully remove the hook where the fish was caught, and then apply the antiseptic there. Wherever you have put the tag, there also you apply the antiseptic, and finish this whole process somewhere between 30 seconds to 1 minute. And then smoothly and slowly release the fish in the water again. So similar techniques are applied for sharks and other animals. For turtles, it is easier because it is possible on the shore. And for the whale sharks, it is like someone has to get into the water, because the whale shark or any other shark, it is neither that small or nor that friendly that you can actually take the risk. So one can actually dive, and in case of sharks, they usually turn the shark upside down. That put the shark at ease. It will not be aggressive, no matter like if it is a great white shark or tiger shark or any other shark. So that is how the researcher accomplished the tagging, and then they release the animal. So light sensor, I mentioned a few slides back. What light sensor detects is basically the sunrise and sunset time. So since you have the depth data, so you can know that sometimes what happens if the animal dives very deep. there will not be enough light. But those readings you can actually omit that. And tag will have its own internal clock, which is usually set at UTC or GMT. And now you can see that wherever the light penetration is there, at those depth records, what is the light level. So you come to know that at what time the sunrise happened where the animal was there, at what time the sunset happened. So for example, in case of India, if the sunrise happens at GMT plus 5:30, that means that, okay, the animal is somewhere near India. But the same, if you can see that if it happens on the GMT plus 6:30 or 7, then you can assume that the animal was on the other side of the Andamans. Similarly, if it is like a GMT plus 3 hours or something like that, you can assume that the animal that you tagged went towards Africa or the Middle East. So sunrise and sunset times can give you that idea, and it can also give you the day length. So day length, because except the equinox times, so during March and September, the length of the day, because when you know the sunrise and sunset, you can see that how many hours the day lasted. And then based on the season date, you know that right now it is northern hemisphere summer. That means the day will be longer. So if you see the longer days, that means you can assume that the animal, or you can understand the animal was there in the northern hemisphere. If it is like a shorter, even in say May or June, then you can understand that it is in the southern hemisphere and the day is the shorter. So in here you can see the reverse example. So where the southern hemisphere summer is shown. Similarly, when you know the sunrise and sunset, when you divide by 2, you can come to know about the noon time, which I was talking about in the example of the Middle East or India or Indonesia. So noon time, when it happens in the internal clock, and noon time in terms of the day length divided by 2, when it happens actually as per your readings or data, so you come to know that what is the offset. If it is at GMT, means definitely the animal was somewhere near that on the GMT line itself. So which is shown here as a red line. So this is how for each of the data record, that will be thousands of them, and scientists have to actually estimate the location. That is how you recreate the track. So sometimes the job is very easy, like it can be seen in the left side example. Sometimes it will be too messy, and then you will have to apply the statistical method, where basically you know the first location, that is tagging location, and then you put some constraint that, okay, the animal that I'm taking, that is, for example, it cannot move beyond 100 kilometer a day in any coast. So any location estimate that is falling beyond the 100 kilometer radius, that is totally ruled out. Then you go for the next condition, that whatever tag has recorded a temperature at what depth, that you can then compare with the satellite data or other like a numerical model data, and then you can compare that which is the closest, for example, temperature data that is there. So out of 5, for example, locations, immediately after the animal was released, and underwater estimated locations are there, you can say that out of 5, which are the promising ones. Then you can go for the second position, then you can go for the third position. So manually, this is not possible to do it single-handedly or manually. Sorry. So that's where actually statistics and statistical models come into the picture. So something called Kalman filtering based on the SST. It is uncentered Kalman filtering based on SST that can actually process your track in this way. So I'm going back to the previous slide where you had relatively smooth estimates, and on right hand side there were very divergent estimates were there. So how tracks can be estimated in either of the cases. So this is how the scientists actually predict the underwater the movement. Now you will think that why this much of pain is required? Can't we use the GPS? Just like we do it, like we track ourselves moving on the road and sharing our live location on WhatsApp to our friends that I'm how far from the meeting place. But the problem is that GPS signals do not penetrate in the water. So that's where the limitation comes. That just because our cell phones are always connected with the internet, and it is always like resetting the clock, because when we purchase a new cell phone, we set, okay, take the uh, time and date from the that service provider. So that is always updating. So when we start GPS in our cell phone, it does not take much time. But if you start any individual GPS, you will actually feel that how many seconds or minutes are passing before the GPS instrument can locate itself. So there are different processes for that. So it will process, and batteries also, because our for cell phones are 4000 mAh battery, and then it can actually have the very huge processors like Snapdragon. So it can actually process this information very fast. But in case of a tag which has goes with the miniaturization principles, so to not to burden the animals as much as possible, the battery are limited, the processing power is very limited, storage is very limited, everything goes into the miniaturization. In that you will have to do that. So almanac is about the sunrise and sunset time, and ephemeris is about the estimates of which GPS satellite will be where. And that is how a platform actually talks with the GPS satellite and then estimates its own position with the principle of the Doppler effect. So cold start, warm start, and hot start, it all happens one by one. So it is not possible even for the surfacing animals that for that long the animal will be there on the water surface just for us. So one can argue that okay, penguins and turtles will come to the shore. That time this can be done, but that is only that location you can actually process in that way. But wherever they are taking long migrations or moving around, that time you will not have this kind of what should I say, privileges or luxury to get the GPS fixed that quick. So what do scientists do for that? So like in Indian conditions, what we call jugaad. So scientists actually come up with some kind of novel ideas and compromises, not compromises, but some way around. So they said that ephemeris data basically it is available from the internet. So that as of now it is not required to be done processing on board the tag itself. Just that let it be when the animal is already underwater. That time also tag can do that and store it for a while. Wherever the animal is surfacing again, let us transmit the previous record that time. Okay, that actually makes sense, and that increase our response time, because if the tag has to just record the location and process it afterwards, then there will be enough time. And almanac data also are basically it can be embedded into the tag programming itself, because all these satellite orbits or the sunrise and sunsets are basically following the laws of physics, and that can be predicted even years and years in ahead. So where the tag mission is usually up to 1 year, that should not be much of the problem coming out of that. And then ultimately it is giving rise to something called technology called fast lock. So in that basically the cold start is being used, and it will just take a snapshot of which GPS satellite it is seeing at what angle. So and it all happens in less than 150 milliseconds. So in compared to this up to 300 seconds, which we were talking in cold start or warm start or hot start, you can see that cold start itself, it now time has been reduced up to 150 milliseconds. So this processing occurs when the animal is already submerged, and then the storage also, where the constraints are there due to miniaturization of the electronics. That time also the digested or processed data only it will be stored, and that will be then transmitted to the satellite whenever next time animal is surfacing. So this is how basically the fast lock application works. But again, to remind you that this works only for the surfacing animals. So between two dives, wherever the animal is surfacing, you can still get something like GPS kind of location. So tracking will be much easier than the fishes. Now, a little bit idea you had already that how it works, why we need to do this kind of experiments, especially in Indian context. So what we have understood the wealth of the knowledge that can be acquired from the foreign programs like TOP, that tagging of Pacific predators. So that is the a huge program that has given the Pacific wide understanding on the top predators, including sharks, tunas, and swordfish, billfish, and so that is we can actually replicate this kind of technological advancement in our backyard. And again, it is fishery independent. It is least intrusive way to do the data collection, because when you do the fishing and do stock assessment, you are removing that particular those individuals out of the system. So this is the non-intrusive one, and you can create the environmentally responsible fishery advisories that can actually INCOIS gives potential fishing zone advisories, and we always strive to make it more environmentally responsible so that the bycatch and poaching can be reduced, because India is also signatory to the CITES and IUCN. So you can work on that where accidental deaths are happening, whether it is for the whales or turtles. That's where also where we are party to the International Whaling Commission and other forums. We can show that we are actually ready for the leadership in the Northern Indian Ocean region right now, which is being usually dominated by the foreign countries other than India. So non-Indian Ocean countries. So that is where India has the opportunity to really come up as a leader. And there are a lot of application potentials also, like alternative livelihoods such as ecotourism, and you can lead to the conservation. Here one example is shown for the shark finning. So one knows that, okay, which are the shark aggregation areas. You can actually do better patrolling so that the poaching can be avoided. So the top photograph is of the shark fins that were removed, and this is actually a very huge global market, albeit illegal. And after that finning, sharks are just thrown back into the water. They will sink. Without the fins, they cannot swim, and they will just wait for the slow death that other sharks or other animals will attack on that. So this is the example of a finned shark on the bottom of the reef. So, and some novel ideas also why we need to do that. So one slide I will show on that. We can use these data as ocean observations. So we hear about the weather predictions, or we hear about the monsoon predictions. That's where a lot of observations, not only from atmosphere, but also from the oceans. We see the prediction that, okay, now this year El Nino is there, so that monsoon will be weak or something like that. So how this kind of El Nino development is being tracked? So that is through the ocean observations. And it is not only limited to the Pacific, it happens in Indian Ocean, it happens in the Atlantic, and there are different platforms for that. So whatever the animals collect the data, that also adds to the ocean observations, because they were there at that particular location, and then they sampled that water for us, how much temperature was there at what depth, for example. So that is also one of the reasons that these kind of experiments actually pay off in multifold, not in terms of only biology, but also in terms of weather and climate prediction. So this is the example of the using the animals as a platform for the ocean observations. So right hand side example is the simpler one. So I'll first explain that. So imagine that smaller fishes are there where you cannot put this big pop-up satellite archival tag, and you have tagged those fishes with acoustic tags. And now in that particular area, seals are also present. So then you can put the seals, put the tags on the seals, which will record those ping from the fishes. So you can use the seals where, for example, bathymetry is too deep. You are working on the place somewhere near to the island, for example, say Southern Ocean, where like you cannot put hydrophones because it is too deep and fishes are never going to dive up to 2000 meter or 4000 meter. Then how do you record the pings? So you leave that job to the seals, which will be diving in that region. And then you can also connect other types of tags on the back of the seal, where it can collect the water like observations also. So what was the temperature at what depth and all. And then all will communicate through the Bluetooth. And then whenever the seal is out, it will send you the data about the fishes and about the water. So that is one example. Left side example is about that how it improves the output of the numerical weather prediction models. So you can see the Antarctic and Antarctic mainland. It is in the like I will have to go back to this pointer. So here, this is the Antarctic where the like land-based ice is there. This is the sea ice. So beneath the ice, the water is there, and it is only surface that ice is there, few meters. So usually when the ice is broken, from those holes, seals will dive, or they will dive from the edge. But in the search of the food, the seals will also go beneath the ice sheets. So now, no matter what kind of autonomous that robotic observation systems that you put, when they are sampling these waters, when they try to come up to the surface and communicate with the satellite, these few meters thick ice sheets will stop them. So you cannot sample beneath the ice sheets, where actually seals can dive and it can come out again on its own. So because seals are not going to be just staying there forever, they will come back for breathing. So that time you get the data beneath the ice sheets. And here the example is there. In this particular chart, the locations are that are shown in the black are from the Argo floats observations, where these robotic floats are going up and down in the water column and sampling the water. And when they come to the surface, it actually transmits the data to the satellite. But some places where Argo cannot go, you can see that the seals are still going and sampling those waters. And then you can see that without seal, what kind of outputs that we get from the numerical model. So this is the like water column that snapshot, vertical snapshot. So how water column looks like. So without seal observations, this is how it looks like, and it will give us the erroneous observations. But with added to the seal data, now you can actually have the better sampling of the water column, and that improves the like how much improvement it happens. It is shown here in terms of color coding, and you can see that wherever the improvement is maximum, that's where it is showing. So this is one example of using the like marine animals as a platform for the ocean observations. And then case by case, there are different examples. So for example, ecotourism related works are also some of that it is being done by government of Gujarat and Tata and WTI, where they raise the awareness about the whale sharks. And we don't have whale shark ecotourism here, but many of the island countries that depend on the tourism, they do that as well. So this is where you can actually make use of the satellite telemetry and come up with the output that actually matters to the coastal community or the like stakeholders. So some underwater photograph of the whale shark tagged with this kind of tags, and then some examples of the tracks. So and in case of like animal wise, the objectives, scientific objectives are different. So for example, if we think about turtles, so ecotourism is one, but conservation is another one, because turtles are known predator for the jellyfish. Now you want to keep your coastal waters free of jellyfish, then you need to conserve the turtle. That is the immediate selfish interest of humans will be there in the turtle conservation. And how turtles get affected through anthropogenic activities, there are multiple ways. So one is that they get entangled in the fishing nets. So fishermen, even though they don't want turtles as a catch, they also want to release the turtle back. But before they can do that, often it will be too late, because the turtle need to come to the surface for breathing. And when the trawling is happening, it is happening for say 1 hour. then for that 1 hour turtle is not able to surface, and turtle does not know that it has to hold the breath for 1 hour, so it might not have been prepared. Sometimes it is also possible that when it is just trying to go to surface for breathing, that time it gets caught in the net, and then basically it gets suffocated. Sometimes when the huge fish shoal is there and the turtle is pushed back to the end of the net, then the weight of the like fish shoal itself will actually suffocate the turtle. So it will virtually crush the animal. And even if the turtles are not actually caught in the net, if they are lucky enough, it can happen that they may get the hit through the boat hull or the propeller. So there is a one photograph that shows where like a turtle shell was like hit with the propeller of the fishing boat. So these are the like multiple ways that turtles can actually be affected. And if we know like in which areas they actually thrive or which areas they actually migrate, we can make the informed decisions. So not to venture into that area or to be cautious while going through the boats, going at this slow speed. Those kind of decision making tools we will have at our disposal. So how that is possible? Only if we can study the movement of the animals. So in other countries that this kind of studies are happening, even in terms of conservation, that where the juveniles are going after the hatching happens. So here are the example that the juveniles are when they go to the sea and when they are released, they actually travel from all the way from Japan to up to Hawaii. So thousands and thousands of kilometers they travel, and what kind of route they take. And in ocean there are no fixed roads or there are no fixed marking like jungles or deserts. So we need to rather see that what kind of oceanographic conditions these animals actually choose to move along. So whether it is some current or some particular range of temperature, because next year the same location may not have the same oceanographic traits. So next batch of juveniles may not exactly take the same route. But if we know the oceanographic preference of the species, we can know that, okay, this year the altered route would be like probably this one. So that is how the telemetry pays off. And this is the example of an experimental product that NOAA USA is actually making with this kind of experiments. When they come to know about the migration route of the turtles, they mask those zones and say to the fishermen that try not to venture into this particular areas, or even if you are crossing, make sure that you are not trawling or you are not going at very high speed, so that fishermen who are actually willing to do the conservation of the turtles, they can actually support to these kind of efforts. So this is how the community participation will be more fruitful if we give them some informed decisions. And now coming to the what actually INCOIS has done in recent past, and we were the first ones to do that in the northern Indian Ocean. So this is my favorite slide. It is more like a snapshot of the whole program that we have actually conducted in past 6 years or so. So this is collage of the field photographs, and you can see that the teams where we collaborated with CMFRI and FSI, they are actually tagging the tuna fish, and some of the places where some underwater photographs or after release, due to the water is very clear, you can see that the fish is swimming away with the tag itself. And how the data what we download, it looks like it is on the right bottom corner. The tag is also shown, and some newspaper cutting where actually it got it became a local sensation, where in Puducherry one fisherman caught the fish with the tag, and it was something new for everyone. So we got that tag back, even though it is not always compulsory to download the data. But yeah, sometimes this kind of happy surprises also happen. So just to show the scope of what we did on the east coast and west coast. So these are the locations where we tagged the fishes, and then where the tags popped off, so locations shown, and then the tracks that we developed. And in the track column map, you can also see there are two that yellow diamond that tracks are there. Those are not the fish tracks. What it is there, I will explain about that after few slides. And this is like the outputs what I'm showing right now. It is from the recently published study that we actually reported all our results and shown that how it can be useful in terms of conservation and sustainable harvest of this stock in the Indian Ocean. So slowly I will try to build this story. So this is the like tagging and tracks are there. So this is the like scope of the study. And the temperature sensor what I was talking about, like all the tags are used to have. So you can actually get the like temperature data, and then you try to club that, okay, how many records are falling at say 28 degrees Celsius temperature, how many records are falling at 29 degrees Celsius temperature, and then you come to know that maximum time the animal that you have chosen to tag and you were studying on what temperature waters it prefers to swim. So here you can see that like the overall for both the Indian seas combined, that what is the like temperature preference of the tuna in our neighborhood, and basin-wise segregation also, because Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal both are having different characteristics. So definitely the fishes that is swimming in those basins will encounter slightly different kind of waters. So this is the like temperature preference that you can come to know. And then something like interesting that we start seeing when we started plotting this depth data. So basically the like leftmost the column, it is the surface, and then when you go on the right hand side on the x-axis, it is the deeper waters. So depth is shown on the x-axis, and how many records were there for each of the depth range per 10 meters. So it is shown in the like in terms of percentage of the data on the y-axis. So you can outrightly see that fishes actually don't dive too often to the deeper waters, and that's where we started getting some new results, because in Pacific and Atlantic, where already the studies have been taken up since 80s and 90s, the tunas tend to show that okay, they have the deep diving capabilities, and they can actually encounter like very deeper waters, and studies are there which says that tuna can actually, even though it is a fish, it can like falsely mimic the characteristic of a warm-blooded animal. So even though like whatever the cold temperatures are there that tuna encounters in the deep dives, it can maintain up to 8 degrees Celsius higher temperatures for its vital internal organs. So those kind of studies scientists have already reported in the Pacific and Atlantic. And when we started seeing these kind of things like our records in the Indian Ocean, it was like a big surprise that why the fishes are not diving. And this actually made us more curious to look into the further that what could be the reason for that. So you can see that here like the diving behavior, it clearly shows that there is no like deep diving behavior, and whatever deep dives are there, that is restricting up to 200 meters. And percentage of the data also it is showing. For example, if you see the uppermost one for the like Indian seas combined, 99% of your data it stops at within like 170 meters, and this is almost half of what actually the previous studies from the other oceans it was reported, which is up to 300 meters also, that they easily dive up to 300 meters. So why the tunas in the like Indian Ocean should be different? So that is the question we are trying to, or how, why they behave in different way. So that is what we are trying to address in this particular study. So we started looking on the like, okay, there is any specific difference between day and night time, because that also it is being widely reported that daytime distribution will be totally on the deeper waters and nighttime distribution will be in the shallower waters, something similar to the Bay of Bengal. what is being shown here, but at the very large scale. So like daytime records are usually like at the very deeper waters, and nighttime records are usually confined into the shallower waters. So that is strong diurnal movement. It is reported. That also it is not shown or exhibited by the tuna that we were studying in the northern Indian Ocean. So that makes us like, okay, whatever the previously plotted, the depth axis or vertical axis of the tuna, that does not actually vary much in the day or night wise as well. So that is how we come to know about, okay, how fishes are behaving at different times of the day. And we then started plotting that, okay, what is the reason. So the background color in this particular one that you are seeing. So first of all, each of these rectangle box are all the 6 tracks. So wherever the fish was swimming, now you take the whole water column temperature and you put that whole track flat as a piece of paper, how it would look. So wherever fish was going, what was the temperature. So obviously upper water which is getting sunlight will always be warmer, and the bottom waters will be cooler, which is shown as blue here. So you can see the temperature scale also on the bottom. But again, curious cases, if you see that where in other basins, it was reported that the tunas can actually deep dive up to waters below 20 degrees Celsius temperature as well. That is not, you can see what you can see from here. So that is what actually makes it very curious. And so the cyan color line is that particular day, what was the median depth that fish was maintaining. That is the point. And then you can see the depth of 23 degree isotherm, and black line is the oxycline depth, below which the oxygen levels are very low. So oxygen rich water on the surface, and oxygen deprived water in the below. So that is how this graph looks like. So we then came to know that, okay, this has to do something probably with the oxygen, because there is nothing related to the temperature that we are seeing previously reported and what we can understand from the animal behavior. So, but in terms of oxygen, it is never be earlier reported, at least from the diving behavior. So that is why it should be unique. That is also the answer lies into the unique oceanography into the northern Indian Ocean. So unlike Atlantic and Pacific, the northern Indian Ocean, if you see the map, it is landlocked from the north side. So there is only landmass. It is not connected to the pole. So what happens is that the ventilation, that circulation that happens, that pole to the equator, that does not happen in the Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal. So Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal are known to have the stratified waters. So whatever that churning due to the wind or cyclone, everything happens. It happens usually in the upper 200 meters. And below that, the waters are usually settled. It is undisturbed. So that leads to the consumption of the oxygen due to the degradation of the organic debris that is happening. So, for example, fishes feed upon each other, then fishes die, plankton die, it all sinks, and bacteria will actually degrade and using the oxygen, dissolved oxygen. But then there is no replenishment of the, or again that can actually replenish the dissolved oxygen concentrations. So that is the reason that Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal are known to have the oxygen minimum zones in the center of them. So it is like very low oxygen water that is sitting in the bottom of the in the center of these basins. So that is how we perceived that this could have something to do with the low oxygen, that tuna is actually not diving further than the oxycline depth. And this actually is more like counterintuitive, because tunas and sharks, they were actually evolved at the time of post-Jurassic period, where due to the volcanic activity and all, oxygen concentration in the atmosphere was very less, And because of that, because ocean and atmosphere will always have the oxygen concentration in balance. So for example, you have more oxygen in air, then because of partial pressure balance, the water will actually absorb more oxygen. And reverse, if it is there in the atmosphere, if the low oxygen levels are there, then seawater will release the oxygen. So that is how it works. So when tunas have evolved from that kind of environment, they should have the capability to withstand low oxygen waters. But for the yellowfin tuna, the problem is that it can actually kind of take a gasp. It can hold the breath. But the thing is that when it has some motivation, for example, food is much below than the oxycline depth, then it is worth to hold the breath and then dive and then feed on those fishes and then come back. Okay. Another thing is that there are studies where scientists have actually put the tuna in the different tanks, and they artificially created different oxygen levels. So out of all the tuna, yellowfin tunas have shown that more you expose them to the low oxygen concentration waters, more time it takes to recover to go back to the normal metabolism. So their RBC pH, it will get acidic with the low oxygen and high CO2, and it takes time to recover. So it is not proportional. So for example, you expose them for 1 minute, and just for giving some example, if you say that it takes 10 minutes to recover, now you expose them for 10 minutes. You don't expect that 10 into 10, 100 minutes they will recover. It takes more than 100 minutes. So that is how uh, they can dive, they have the capability, but it comes at the cost. So as long as tuna has any motivation, it will dive below the oxycline depth. If it does not have any motivation, it will not. And how do we know that if the tunas in the Indian Ocean has any motivation to dive below the oxycline depth? So you remember two yellow diamond tracks that I was showing? Those are from the robotic Argo floats that also had the sensor that measures the chlorophyll. And if you see the data from those two Argo floats in the vicinity of our tuna movement, so here you can see that this is the deep chlorophyll maxima. It has recorded. So here at this particular depth, the chlorophyll concentration is maximum in the water column. So both are basically confined into the depths of 60 to 80 meters. So how now the deep chlorophyll maxima, it is associated with yellowfin tuna. Now yellowfin tuna is more like a cheetah of the ocean. It is not a vegetarian fish. So it has nothing to do with chlorophyll. If the phytoplankton are there, it is same like cheetah has no motivation how green the grass is. But like we were talking about the diving behavior, and tuna will dive where the small fishes are there on which they are feeding upon. So small fish are actually planktivorous fish, that what we call forage fish, which tuna will eat. So that could be like a sardine or mackerel or anchovy. So basically those are the fish where the food is available, they will aggregate. And if the food is aggregated as around 60 to 80 meters in our basins, then small fishes will be swimming in huge shoals at that particular depth. And for tuna, then it will be like motivation to dive up to those depths only. And because now they are fed well, there is no motivation to dive further. So that is where the behavior of the tuna in the northern Indian Ocean, it differs to the previously reported from the other oceans. And here another proxy for their oxycline depth is there in terms of sea level anomaly or sea surface height anomaly. So if you see that the records of the tuna with reference to the sea surface temperature, and when you see the with reference to the sea level anomaly, you see that there is a better correlation with sea level anomaly, which basically tells you about how deep the oxycline depth is there. So where the divergence zones are there, where convergence zones are there. So mixed layer is how deep, and then how much of the at what depth the stratification is happening into the water column. So sea level anomaly is better proxy for that rather than temperature. That is where it seems that tuna has the more affinity towards behaving or even laterally moving or vertically moving with reference to these features in the sea. And what basically it means in terms of that sustainable harvest or conservation of tuna. So this slide summarizes that. It is more like a cartoon. It is not actually the data or photograph of tuna, but it shows that the outcome of this telemetry, what it actually is there. That earlier understanding was there that tuna stays above the thermocline, no matter what kind of waters are there. So in the upper panel, it is shown the what was previous understanding, and then you can see the downwelling zones where water is actually converging and then sinking. So it actually pushes the deep layer, that mixed layer depth into deeper. And reverse is the upwelling zones where the nutrient rich waters are coming close to the surface waters. So that's where the low oxygen waters are also coming close to the surface waters. So that is called upwelling zones. So upwelling zones are being marked with the negative sea level anomaly, and it can be recorded through the satellites. And downwelling zones on the left side, that is like with the satellites, they can actually be recorded in terms of positive sea level anomaly. So when you have the sea level anomaly, you can track these eddies with these kind of features, and then you can estimate that how the low oxygen waters, how deep it is there. So with this particular understanding and combining that remote sensing data with the satellite telemetry data, now we understand that the upwelling zones, even though these are the nutrient rich and phytoplankton rich, it is less preferred to the tuna because overall that less vertical movement that it allows for tuna for the oxygen rich waters. And soon they will encounter with shallow depths also the low oxygen waters. So they prefer to avoid those like upwelling zones, and they also prefer to avoid downwelling zones, because even though huge like vertical scope for the movement for vertical movement is there, uh, that area is not as productive or nutrient rich because the spent waters are converging there and now it is sinking. So it is not nutrient rich at all. It is not productive. There is very less forage fish available. So there is no movement for the tuna to actually go to those regions. So in compared to the previous understanding, now we can actually tell that this is like the vertical section of the seawater column, and then this is like a 3D corridor within which only tuna will migrate. So it is not tuna will is like a totally free as it what it seems, and it can swim anywhere, it can go anywhere. It is not as free as it looks like. It is the what we call prisoner of its own ecological preferences or its own niche. So same applies for the other animals where like scientists study whether it is a whale shark or turtle, or even in case of birds. When birds take long migration, they simply don't say that, okay, from Africa to India, this is the shortest route, I will take that. Birds often follow the like upper atmosphere, that very strong like winds, so that they have the minimum effort to put to take up this migration, because during the migration usually they will not have anything to eat. So this is how it works for the all the migrating, whether it is animals or birds, and this is how we can actually come to understand that what is the niche or the what are the ecological preferences for a particular animal. So this is in general like what data can tell us from the satellite telemetry, and the presentation has gone too long, but it is coming to this end. So I would like to thank to all the teams that have made this study possible, and thank you Mangrove Foundation for hosting this kind of unique webinar. And if any questions, a host will coordinate from now onwards from here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I request all the participants to please post their questions in the chat box. Nimit sir will answer some of them owing to the time limitation. Others will be answered via email. Nimit sir, we have
Yes, please.
received one question. one question
Please.
from our Facebook viewer.
Yeah.
Just a second.
Okay. Meanwhile, I will just address some of the questions which were there already in the chat box. So somebody has
Okay,
asked,
sir.
yeah, how much samples are tagged? So what happens is that it is totally like based on your budget, because each of these tags that we used, it costed around like 2 lakhs rupees. So it is not possible to use too many of them, but there is no point of using too less of that. So that is one of the reasons that the satellite telemetry is not like possible economically for all kinds of countries. But when the collaborations are possible, then it is actually possible to take this kind of studies. And that is what precisely we did. So that answers one question. Another is the range that can be accessed. So I have shown the maps that basically satellites are actually orbiting throughout the planet. And wherever the animals are there, when the satellite is overhead, basically it will actually record that ping from the animal. So even though you might have tagged the animal off the Indian coast, but suppose that if the tagged animal is migrating up to Madagascar or Australia, whenever satellite is overhead Madagascar or Australia, that time that satellite will record, and it will put that record into your account. So there is no range limitation is there. So that is how the technology works. And lifespan is like usually what we put the tag pre-programmed up to 1 year, and that also like sometimes you can expect mortalities, sometimes you can expect that okay, the animals have the mysterious way to shed the tags which no one knows so far. So these things happen. Sometimes the damage to the sometimes the animal that you tag, it is being preyed upon by another shark. So these kind of things happen, and they like whatever you have pre-programmed up to 1 year, but you may not ensure that the tag will record the data up to 1 year. It may shorten also. Now, any other question? How do animals decide their tracks when suddenly the cyclone conditions in the water? So this is like basically they actually go to the instincts. So we have not studied animal movement with reference to the cyclones, but it is like what animals do on land. So wherever there is like a very heavy downpour, animals take shelter on land. Similar to that, wherever the like any cyclone overhead, then we can expect that fishes will dive deeper to take the shelter. And then whenever the cyclone passes, and then they can actually go about their usual business. So system give information about cyclonic conditions of water. No, not so far. But as I said, that these kind of observations from the animals that actually gives us the ocean observations that improve the cyclone forecasting, climate forecasting, and why GPS signal do not penetrate into the water, because GPS signal is just like a mobile signal. So underwater communication is not possible. It will be like water is a thicker medium, and signals of mobile or GPS or satellite, that is weak, so that it can travel through the air like from say 800 kilometers to the seawater surface, but it will not penetrate into the water. So that is the reason that GPS signal will not penetrate into the water. How can we track the whole shoal of fish? So yeah, we actually, you are right that we tag a few of the fish, and then if from biology point of view, we understand that fish has this shoaling behavior, like in case of tuna. When you tag the fish and that fish is moving, you can understand that it is representing the behavior of the whole shoal. And is there any device which can track sharks? Yeah, people have been using these PSATs to track sharks. Which method is better for turtles? Marine, epoxy, or fiberglass-based resin method? So based on what kind of species is there, hard shell turtle or short like a leatherback turtle. Based on that, there are like research papers are there that gives you the like comparison of the retention of the tag on the turtle using resin or epoxy. Okay, and what is the lifespan? That is again repeat question. And does the System give any information about the cyclonic condition is the repeat question. Okay, maybe I'm going upwards. Yeah, wait, is there any website? We can see the live migration of the sharks. So the universities or the research organizations which actually tag these fish or mammals or any other animals, if they put the tracks live, then only you can see that. Because just like the email, where you have invested for some platforms, you only get the data in your account. So even though Argos Communications is receiving that, they cannot put it live because it is your data. So that is where how it works. And so that is about the website and how much data storage is present on this tag. Different tags have different capacities. So it is usually in the few MBs, but that megabytes also are sufficient for whatever optimized data records that tag is recording. And is the Turtle Explorer device working on satellite? No, Turtle Explorer device is not working on satellites, but satellite telemetry can tell you where you can actually put this Turtle Explorer device in the use. So that is the one of the application, that if you know the migration of the turtles, if it is falling in your region of interest, that's only where you have to use the Turtle Explorer device. Where you know that, okay, turtle migration does not happen from the data, you are sure about that, you can actually do away with the implementation of Turtle Explorer device. And that is the motivation for the fisheries organizations to make their policies according to that. How PFZ help reduce ghost fishing?
Sir, we will be taking last two questions from our FB viewers.
Please tell me.
Hello?
Yeah, please.
So the first question is, what happens when the fish with satellite tag is eaten by the predator, and will it continue to work?
It will continue to work, but it cannot transmit from the stomach of the shark. So that is the problem. Sometimes it happens that suddenly the recording, like for example, in case of seals or penguins. So researchers have noted the curious incidences, like suddenly the records are vanishing more than usual. So for example, penguins usually take 1 hour dive or 20 minutes dive. It is not reporting for days and days. And suddenly it comes on the surface and then it drifts along with the currents. So scientists can infer that shark might have attacked to the penguin, and then after some time, shark might have regurgitated that tag out of its stomach, because it is not something like a food or something. So, and fortunately, its tag was still working. So where the longer time when it was in the stomach of shark, it did not communicate as usual. It was supposed to be, but after that, it started reporting. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah, another question.
Thank you so much, sir. I guess we should stop the question session here because of the time limitation. People, you can send your questions in our chat box and we will answer you through email.
Sure. And I thank everyone for the interest and curious questions. And because of time limitation, otherwise I would have wanted to answer all the questions. But thank you very much. And Mangrove Foundation will try to send those questions back to me. I'll try to, give justice to those questions as much as possible, and they will send it back to you.
Sure, sir. We will forward all the questions to you. Now I would like to request our Executive Director, Mr. Virendra Tiwari, APCCF Mangrove Cell, to express his thoughts.
Unmuted. Thank you, Dr. Nimit. Thank you for such an informative talk.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, actually, I joined late. I was not aware of the timing. I think almost I joined when it was about to finish. But I'm sure all the participants, which were more than 90, must have benefited from the information which you shared. And I again congratulate the organizers from the Mangrove Foundation. And I'm very sure that in future also we will organize such informative session. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. At the end of the session, I'd like to thank our officials for support and encouragement, as well to all the participants around the globe for attending this session. Finally, I would like to request you all to kindly follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for next updates. Thank you so much and have a safe time.
Dr. Nimit, thank you so much. It was very insightful presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, sir.